Shall we start?
This might be my friend. Oh, hello. Hi, come on.
Okay, I think we should start. And Tashi Dele to everyone, and thank you for coming. Anna, I'm going to introduce Anna just briefly. Anna is a PhD student at Oriental Institute of the University of Oxford. We are delighted to have Anna to speak on our first lecture series of the Trinity term. Anna has been to Tibet many times and she speaks fluent Tibetan. And she studied in Lhasa, she studied in Xining, Guangdong, Beijing, as well as in Nepal. So yeah, I think she's a very, very adequate to this topics. She will talk about Amnye Machen's 2014 fourth year pilgrimage. Please join me in welcoming Anna.
Well, thank you for coming. I've put in lots of images not to bore you, at least visually. And in this presentation I would like to show the great and fast changing Tibetan sacred spaces and related religious and social practices currently undergo in the processes of modernization and state interventions of the People's Republic of China. I draw on a case study of a very important sacred mountain in East Tibet called Amnye Machen. Firstly, I indicate how such sacred mountains, such sites, and their deities are perceived in Tibetan culture in general, focusing on pilgrimage practice. Then I discuss how these perceptions are currently being challenged at the chosen case site. I also try to show a bit the role of the concepts of treasures in these processes to advertise our treasure seminar series on Tuesdays at 5 at Olsen. This presentation is mostly based on fieldwork and it is partially work in progress. The last great pilgrimage to Amnye Machen was in 2014, so this is why the year appears there, and I will get to that. So first, I would like to start with a map of Tibet. So this is the Tibetan plateau, and we have to go to the east to come to Amnye Machen, which is here, to the first curve of the Machu in Tibetan, Machu, Yellow River. So Amnye Machen is the mountain range that makes the Great River of China then, and of Eastern Tibet, to make the big curve in the east. Here, and the region I'm going to talk a lot about is Golok, at its outskirts, kind of, Amnye Machen lies. If we zoom in, the current Chinese administrative division, that's the Qinghai Province, and here we have to go to the south to the Golok Prefecture, which is roughly this part, and we find Amnye Machen here, the white peak here, for those of you who know China. Well, Tibet in China now. And the prefecture currently has about 80 square kilometers, which means the size of Scotland, and a population of 200,000 inhabitants, which is a bit more than Oxford. We find high altitude alpine steppes. Most of the area is around the altitude of 4,000 meters. But we also find much lower and lush valleys filled with forests. So it means the inhabitants are either nomads or farmers. These are some of them. And they are known to keep a strong own identity. Most of the inhabitants are Tibetan, almost all of them, but now there has been a strong influx of Chinese, supported by a state scheme of immigration, and I will get to that. All the main 5 schools of Tibetan Buddhism are found in Golok, and also Yungdrung Bön, close to Golok. Nyingma and Gelug schools prevail, and also Jonang has got a strong influence. Under the so-called Great Development of the West strategy plan, launched by the PRC in 1999, this area was also put on significant, or this strategy has been implemented significantly here since 2007. So Gelug recently faces massive urbanization and infrastructure developments. So for instance, this valley, which is now the capital, called Dao, the capital of the Gelug Prefecture, used to be an empty winter pasture land for local nomads, still at the beginning of 50s. And now it's a city, now it's even bigger. This is a picture from 2014. The mountain I focus on lies about 100 kilometers west from the site, Amnye Machen. It's I say mountain, but it's more a mountain range, and it is believed to be inhabited by a powerful deity called also Amnye Machen. He's got many names, but this is the name that is now probably most commonly used, and I will also use during this presentation. As you can see, he's depicted as a typical mountain god in Tibet in a warrior's attire, wearing a helmet, turban, or a felt hat, and holding a spear in his right hand and jewels in his left hand, riding a white horse. Now I need to make a short explanation here. In the divine pantheon in Tibet, we can say that there are two classes of divinities, those introduced with Mahayana Buddhism, gaining significant influence in Tibet from the 7th century AD. These divinities embody the Buddhist spiritual goal of awakening, enlightenment, and they themselves are awakened, and people approach them for the same goal, to achieve spiritual liberation. The second class of deities, like Amnye Machen, are by researchers thought to be indigenous to Tibet, not to come from India with Buddhism. These are multiple gods of landscape, fortune, warfare, human body, household, etc. These deities master the mundane sphere of people's lives, such as health and well-being, and in fact have nothing to do with the Buddhist concept of awakening. So Amnye Machen falls into the second category, but as we will see, it is not that straightforward to make this distinction always. Amnye Machen is generally addressed by Tibetan terms such as Jibdar, Jibdar Yulha, concerning deities inhabiting the landscape or a certain physical place, deities who are focused on worldly needs. And in Eastern Tibet, in this part, the first term, Jidar, is the most commonly used. That's also why I'm going to use it today. It is composed of two syllables, as you can see, of two words. The first ji means a base, something where something is based, grounded in, and dar here denotes an owner, a master. So in this case, the ji, the base, is the physical landscape, the mountain range, and vast areas around ascribed to fall into the ownership and power of the deity. Yet there are also various other potential material bases to hold a worldly deity. The ji can also be a stove, the main pillar of the house, and other things. Here and mostly it is a landscape feature, a certain territory. There must be hundreds or thousands of such divinities across Tibet, but Amnye Machen is a very prominent one. Such mountain deities, as him, are intimately tied to the land of their surroundings and resident people and animals. They require propitiation and certain acts from humans, for which they grant protection, fertility and prosperity. The land around is believed to fall fully within their power and property, including its waters, mineral resources, fauna and flora. Amnye Machen is definitely the most powerful and the most venerated Jibdar of East Tibet by Bön and all schools of Tibetan Buddhism, by both monastics and laymen. He is venerated not only there, but also across Tibet up to the west, to Ladakh. And nowadays Tibetans bring him all around the world, so he has a shrine in the USA, he's worshipped regularly in the Bonpo Monastery in France, south of Paris. So he's got many images. This is another example. Here you can also see his retinue of his lesser divinities. I will come to that. If we go into the etymology of the name just a bit, so we see again two words, Amnye and Machen. The second has got the syllable ma, which indicates the area of the upper flow of the Yellow River, if we translate from Chinese, or Ma River in Tibetan. So it seems to be a toponym, the Ma territory of the upper flow of the Yellow River. So the name of the deity again goes back to the landscape, and he's called Machen, the big one from Ma, or Ma. Also the big one of the Ma beings, the different divinities of the land inhabiting this area called Ma. The first syllable, Amnye, is a polite address to older and respected people in Eastern Tibet, derives from a kinship term for a grandfather or another member of the male ancestor's lineage. In contemporary Golok and elsewhere in Tibet, some social groups link their descent to such divinities of landscape, so they are perceived as ancestors. And I know of several examples. This notion of ancestry is not that strong for Amnye Machen, even though he appears in the genealogy of the Gesar king of Ling. But what is strong with Amnye Machen is the Buddhicization impact of him. These mountain deities in Tibet, which are presumably indigenous, as I said, have been under strong Buddhist influence, and a number of them in East Tibet are said to have adopted the spiritual goal of awakening that Buddhism brought. And these deities are believed to be on the path, on the Bodhisattva's 10 stages path to awakening. Amnye Machen, because he's a powerful Jibdach, he's almost awakened. He is said to be on the 10th stage, just before awakening. But according to some in East Tibet, Amnye Machen has already achieved awakening and thus Buddhahood. He is then considered the biggest and most powerful world Jibdach, but also by some one of the most powerful deities, because he's both a Jibdach and a Buddha. So Amnye Machen gets also identified with Chakrasamvara, the Buddhist deity brought from India. Amnye Machen is also seen as the Lari of Tibet, or East Tibet, the place upon which the prosperity of the whole country depends, the place that holds the vitality, life force, La, in Tibetan, of the life force of Tibet and Tibetans, which is most likely a pre-Buddhist concept. So just to sum up, we see that he's a very important deity and has strong mundane aspects of worship, but also strong Buddhist soteriological aspects. And that means that people can approach him for both goals. Having such roles, it is not surprising that Amnye Machen appears in many religious rituals in different ways, and it seems that he probably acquires the greatest part of texts dedicated to a single mountain deity in Tibet. I think it's my estimation. He's also got a number of depictions. This is another one. And from the 15th century onwards, he's got multiple texts composed to him with many important scholars like the 5th Dalai Lama. Also in contemporary East Tibet, scholars who are active now dedicate texts to him. If we go into history, the deity as Machen Pomra appears in Bonpo sources, which likely go to the 12th century. And Tibetans credit the first mention of Amnye Machen to the important Buddhist translator Vairochana, who lived in the 8th century, but that's more difficult to confirm. The probably earliest account of the place is a geographical description in the Chinese New Tang history, describing events taking place in 622, when the Chinese Tang dynasty was sending envoys to the borders of China in the east and describing what they saw there. And this account mentions that local Tibetans worship a mountain which is most likely Amnye Machen. But the chronicle was composed, I think, in the 12th century and describes events from 622. And then also, Amnye Machen survives as an important deity in some old religious traditions in Tibet, in Eastern Tibet, especially called Sipel, which seem to have no Buddhist influence at all. As other sacred mountains in Tibet, now I will go to the pilgrimage. Amnye Machen is famous as a pilgrimage site, especially during the horse year of the 12-year animal zodiac cycle of the Tibetan calendar. This is when it is most auspicious to visit Amnye Machen and conduct a pilgrimage there. The last occasion was in 2014 or 2015, because Tibetan New Year starts, or Tibetan New Year is usually in January, February. So 2015 and a bit of 2014 and a bit of 2015. The first horse year and the first pilgrimage to Amnye Machen after the Cultural Revolution, which happened in the 1960s and 70s in China when all religious practice was forbidden, happened in 1990, the second one in 2002. So this occasion in 2014 was the third one since Cultural Revolution. The horse year is a typical timing for sacred mountains in Tibet, and during this year it is a custom to circumambulate them, walk around them by pilgrims. The development of a circumambulation path around the place is by researchers considered to be of Buddhist influence and brought from India, but it can be questioned as well. The circumambulation path around Amnye Machen is about 180 kilometers long, and now we see Amnye Machen from the above. So this is his peak, which we saw in the photograph just before, and this is the path marked in red going around him. The path is flanked with individual important holy places and stops of miracles directly linked to divinities, as well as historical masters and sacralized natural sites. The path is perceived to be bestowed by their blessings and powers. In 2014 and 15, crowds of pilgrims flocked to Amnye Machen. The places around Amnye Machen in the mountain range and around are associated with many local divinities. So Amnye Machen himself, he's believed to occupy the main peak, which is over 6,000 meters high. And scattered around are his subjects, his divine retinue. So we find his wife in the middle small peak. Then we find his father. This is just to give you an idea of the retinue such a deity is believed to have. His mother, she's got a very nice peak. And this is how she's envisioned in a depiction. So always the different places of landscape, if they have such a deity projected into them, the deity would also have a physical appearance. This is his minister. This is his younger brother. He is not depicted, or not yet maybe. He is supposed to be living in this boulder. And then there are also all kinds of deities. This is how they come up from the waters. And this comes from a recent publication from the area. Apart from these beings, there are many, many more, maybe 1,000 it is said, more than 1,000. There are also different Buddhist and Bonpo masters, historical or semi-historical figures projected into the different places. To give an example how the pilgrimage looks like, so these are examples, some of the Buddhist deities associated with certain parts of the pilgrimage path. So this is the Indian Buddhist enlightened or awakened Tara deity. This is, here the peak is said to represent Chenrezig Avalokiteshvara, and this is why people prostrate to him. here. Yeah, and Amnye Machen is also shown as a Buddha in some publications. One, or the most busy place and the most visited place on the path is this one, called Jordenyaka. Here, Amnye Machen's glacier reaches its lowest points, so all pilgrims have to stop here. They also camp here, this is their place. The snow abode of the deity is very sacred, and people come to the glacier as close as they can. They leave many offerings. You can see the prayer flags. They touch the glacier, they prostrate. They eat it. They drink its waters. They collect the soil over which the glacier has passed for healing. And in the modern age, they also post for photographs. It's these guys. For social media usually. But the important thing is that many prayers are pronounced and many offerings are offered. Here is a monk assisted by a layperson throwing alcohol, and the monk is reciting a text. People scatter lungtas, which are these small papers. We can translate their name as wind horses. They represent well-being and prosperity. Yeah, you can have a look if you don't know them. And they also hang prayer flags, offer juniper fumigation sung, because juniper is a tree in Tibet associated with deities, and the smell is supposed to please them. All these are typical offerings to all mountain deities across Tibet. So here we can see a fumigation is called throne. So a heap of, or a construction of stones upon which people throw all kinds of food. Juniper, you can see juniper branches, kataks, the Tibetan ceremonial scarves, also milk, alcohol, anything nice, clothes. And then all these things are burned during recitals, and also some conch sounds, and then different kinds of yellings which attract the mountain deities, and especially Amnye Machen, to come. And behind is a cairn of arrows, which is a place signifying such a place of offering. What we also see that there's a Buddhist stupa built by a nearby monastery. This is how it looks like. So it's a huge and a very busy place where there's always someone, and the heap of offerings was on fire, must have been for months non-stop when I was there. And people constantly come. Pilgrims also place treasure offerings. Sorry, this is still burning tea. And there's lots of barley as well, the grains, and kataks, and nomads on the way in the snow. But the pilgrims also offer treasure offerings called ter, or khtir in local pronunciation. These are the little colorful things back there, and I will get back to this. Now just remember this, please. Here the treasure offerings are placed into the glacier of Amnye Machen. The further inside, the better. Another place of importance on the pilgrimage path is called Tachokkonka. Here the pilgrims usually see the peak of Amnye Machen for the first time, and it's also the place of the historically probably the oldest and most important cairn. That means the structure from wooden arrows to worship the deity, where it has been standing even before the Cultural Revolution. And here people prostrate to Amnye Machen because, as I said, he has been identified with the Buddha, so it's alright and it's beneficial to prostrate to him, but if he wasn't, if he was just a mundane deity, people could not prostrate. And they can also recite prayers to both Buddhist deities and also to Amnye Machen as a mundane deity. Then, for instance, on the path we encounter many sites. the typical ones that occur at probably every Tibetan Buddhist pilgrimage site around the mountain are places like Scale and Mirror and Hell Path of the Lord of the Death, Yama or Shinje in Tibetan, or a place where people carry stones around to repaint the kindness for their parents and ensure a better birth for them. And there's also one monastery on the path. This is just to give you an idea how such a place looks like. So who comes for such a pilgrimage? Mostly Tibetans from East Tibet, because it's East Tibet and the deity is mostly important there, but also Tibetans from Central Tibet and all across Tibet. Most nomads and farmers. These are some nomads from East Tibet. Both Buddhist and Bonpos. This is one of the main Bonpo masters in East Tibet. City dwellers. They come through all the year, but the times when there is no requirement for working in the fields or taking too much care of the cattle, or when there are holidays in the cities, is the most busy, which means winter and autumn. And people come walking, as you can see, which is the most beneficial way, and it takes about 4 to 5 days to cover the 180 kilometers. But they can also another monks walking, but they can also prostrate, which takes about 1 month and is taken as the most beneficial way. Or now they can take a car, which takes 1 day, and these guys are very happy that they can do that. Or they can also take a motorcycle or a bike or a horse, but a horse is very rare now, although it used to be quite common probably in the past. The most beneficial is a pilgrimage performed by prostrations, because one receives the biggest merit, which is a Buddhist concept, but also spends most time at the holy site, which means gets most power and blessings as are possible. The second most beneficial way is by walking, the third by horse, and then bicycle, and the last is car, but car is becoming more and more common. So why do people come? Now I will give a few quotes from the pilgrims. The circumambulation of Amnye Machen is for the benefit of all sentient beings, for world peace. Amnye Machen is our mountain god. We are Tibetans, so we go. It is good for everything. I wish for myself, for health, my studies, job and family, for happiness, and also for other people. The year of the horse, all Xibu deities of the world gather here, so it is very beneficial to come here and offer them offerings. Performing the circumambulation brings great merit and virtue, that's Buddhist values, and also healing. Performing the circumambulation can heal any disease. So we can see that people project both worldly and then spiritual, Buddhist spiritual aims into the pilgrimage practice. And Amnye Machen, as we know, can be addressed for both. For many pilgrims, such an event also functions as a marker of Tibetan identity, which is becoming very strong now, to take religious events to show own Tibetanness. And these are also the same ideas projected on hiding and offering the treasures. Now I will go to treasures. They look like this. Anyone can offer such a treasure, ter or khtir. But it is most typically done by men, by both laymen and monastics, as are also all the other offerings to Xibu deities. A treasure can either be a treasure sachet, as here from cotton, or a treasure vase, that would be this glass one, but it can also be from ceramics. And it contains materials representing power, prestige, abundance, and vitality. The treasures contain, or should contain, precious and semi-precious stones, can contain medicines, and definitely have to have representatives of the various grains on which people depend by their sustenance. So here we can see barley, in this glass flask. Xibu is a popular addendum. The treasures are produced usually in monasteries or by individuals such as tantrics or medical practitioners, and they should go through a ritual consecration. All the substances in them are common ritual substances featuring in other contexts, but here they have a special function, and they are associated with two principles called yang and sachi. Grains and wool stand for the yang, the whole treasure for the sachi. Both terms come from a series of such concepts of concepts in Tibet, concepts of auspiciousness and well-being. Tibetans distinguish several of these categories. Here are two, yang and sachi, and the others are, for instance, tashi, that you know from the greeting tashi dele, or lungta, that is also the name of these paper offerings. So all these represent different ways of auspiciousness one has to acquire. There are different forces that we need, and they can be acquired from the divinities of land, and in a certain way are tied to the landscape. Yang is a potency of vitality and prosperity. Charles Ramble translates the term as good fortune, Samten Karme as quintessence of fortune. Without yang, without this force, one cannot live. A person losing yang becomes ill and weak, without children, and would soon die. The same applies to cattle and other animals. Everyone needs the yang, including the land, which in a way is a repository of the force. People and animals can acquire the yang potency from the land, from the mountain deities. The Amnye Machen and other deities are often summoned to grant yang during rites of passage, such as marriages or illness, at any time that the yang is needed. The pilgrimage practice itself can be seen as a means of yang acquisition, and also pilgrims many times recite during the various offerings performed at Amnye Machen a call for the yang. Amnye Machen is called a yangdach of his yangji, the lord of yang, of his base of yang. And the base of yang is the area of his mountain, and Amnye Machen is seen as the guarantor of this yang force of East Tibet, and by some people even of the Tibet as a whole. Without this force, and without Amnye Machen guaranteeing it, Tibet cannot flourish. The other term, sachu, is a concept that land is usually strongly tied to, the earth or land essence. Chu, essence, is what gives a certain entity the capacity to be that entity. For instance, food with no chu, with no this essence, would be tasteless and would not feed. Medicine with no essence would not heal. Land with no essence would not sustain anyone. People insert treasures into Amnye Machen's land to support this essence, this potency of fertility and vitality. The treasures can become properties of the deity and can never be extracted again, only as a hostile act. This is how you would destroy your enemy, to take out his treasures. Now we get to a typology of treasures. So now we've covered the first one, and we get to the second one. All these notions, concepts and terminology are also applied to natural treasures, which are typically precious metals, minerals, healing substances. Therefore, mining, extracting of these substances from the earth is, in Tibet, often linked to taking out intestines or personal property of a deity of the land. In fact, every land is perceived to have such a deity, more or less powerful, and Amnye Machen is extremely powerful. Mining is forbidden, which brings if it happens, it brings horrifying natural disasters as punishments of the deity, such as earthquakes. Precious substances mined are called treasures, also ter, and their repositories and mines are called places or surfaces of treasures, terka. Another kind of treasures are magical objects believed to have been hidden underground by divine entities for their own purposes. For instance, the typical king hero Gesar is said to have concealed his helmet and armor at Amnye Machen and can retrieve it in times of need for his battles with demons. Again, these treasures cannot be usually taken out, and exceptions apply only to authorized figures, such as Gesar. And as I said, Amnye Machen appears in the genealogy of Gesar, so we see that there is an ancestral link. And also burials of prominent ancestors and other individuals with great agency, such as religious masters, clan chiefs, war heroes, women with many children, can be regarded and treated as treasures offered to Jidar deities of land. The corpse, and especially the bones, are then the treasure, buried, accompanied by many offerings. All these kinds of treasures are taken as repositories of vitality and power, enhancing the land. So how does the pilgrimage in 2014 and 15 concern treasures, and what is remarkable about the pilgrimage? As I said, so many people arrived, so many pilgrims turned up, that we can see the pilgrimage practice is rapidly growing since the first conduction in 1990 after the Cultural Revolution. And I also think it was the most massive pilgrimage to Amnye Machen likely in the history due to modern means of transport widely used. Tibetans say that 500,000 of people arrived, but dozens of thousands definitely. And the Kora, the path of the pilgrimage, appeared very often as a stream of people currently going, in both cars and walking usually. Given Amnye Machen's importance and governmental restrictions or other sacred places in Tibet, such as Kailash, I also think it might have been the most massive pilgrimage in Tibet as such. And it is likely that it was the last one performed at Amnye Machen, mostly in the traditional way on foot, due to new road constructions, and I will come to that. The pilgrimage was also an event of new knowledge access. Social media and modern technology such as iPhones and smartphones served to bring traditional narratives about a sacred place and also prayer recitals to accompany the offerings. The religious practice of the pilgrimage was also a significant financial investment and for many a good business opportunity to sell offerings. Given the increased average income and living standard in Tibet, it might have been the so far most expensive pilgrimage performed, well, definitely at Amnye Machen, during which the mountain was heaped by tons of barley, endless bottles of alcohol and prayer flags. All these changes also concerned the treasures offered, great external involvement of pilgrims from both close and faraway locations, great financial investment into treasures, and modern media access. So people came to offer treasures, even though their purchase can be quite expensive actually, especially if there are some precious substances in. There can be gold and silver and all kinds of other things, turquoise, pearls. They often brought them in cars, and they offered a significant number of them. And they could offer them reading a recital from an iPhone. Importantly, the pilgrimage was the last one before Amnye Machen undergoes significant changes. The whole area of the mountain has been declared a so-called National Geopark of China within the global UNESCO Geopark scheme. Amnye Machen received the recognition of a national AAAA level, tourist attraction, which is a very high level, which was officially planned to open just after the pilgrimage, with a new highway and an airport. For this purpose, Amnye Machen was introduced by the state in a way that often contradicts traditional Tibetan perceptions. I find it quite funny that now Amnye Machen in the official discourse is represented by this brontosaurus, which is the Chinese sign for all national geoparks in China. There are hundreds of them, also many sacred Tibetan mountains in Tibet apart from Amnye Machen. So, how does the geopark look like? To give just one example, this is on the pilgrimage path. There is a big stone, which is an important stone in the area because it is believed that the Tibetan master Shabkarwa, who lived in the 18th and 19th century, came and meditated there. That's why the stone is covered in all kinds of offerings, again, kataks, the ceremonial scarves, money, sticked with butter. People climb on the stone, and on the stone they see a footprint of the master, which is here, also covered with butter as offerings. The Tibetans put a sign there saying this is the place where Master Shabkarwa came and he really was here, he meditated here. Whereas the next sign put there by the state county bureau says that this is the footprint. They say that we come to a pictographic stone of Buddha's footprint. Okay, in Tibetan it still remembers the master Shabkarwa. In Chinese it is translated as a Buddha. We have brontosaurus sign here. But what we read, so we read in English that it is called Siakabat Tsenkang, that's Chinese transcription of Tibetan, that the place is called like this in Tibetan. It is a rock pit 20 centimeters long and 8 wide, looking like a footprint. Although it is only a dissolution pit formed by differential weathering of rocks, local people tell a story full of wit and humor based on it. It is a provincial level recognition. So the English translates the Chinese and the Tibetan gives the same description. So it is completely different from the original view that the Tibetans had. Why also the Chinese or the county bureau has to come and describe the stone is because Master Shabkarwa was here, but then they reinterpret the stone in such a way. There are dozens of such examples on the circumambulation path, and these signs were put there in 2016 and this process continued for years afterwards. Amnye Machen and its sacred spots were presented in a likely scientific discourse as a world geological marvel situated in China, measured and confined by the means of Western science and thus the global community, part of the UNESCO worldwide national geopark schemes and also global geopark scheme. The other points that were stressed in these reinterpretations was the local pristine natural landscape, peculiar and shamanistic, that's a quote, indigenous costumes of only local significance, and Buddhism of the so-called Tibetan minority. And then also many sites were linked to the Tibetan semi-mythical hero King Gesar, who is propagated by the state as a historical figure. In the time of the pilgrimage, half of the circumambulation path was covered by a new highway. The construction started in 2013 and coincided with the pilgrimage. I don't know if that was planned or not. The road was designed to connect Xining and Chengdu, the capitals of Qinghai and Sichuan provinces, which is a huge distance far. They choose this location, although it reaches altitudes around 4,500 meters, right at the foot of Amnye Machen, and then continues to Nyenpo Yutse, another important sacred mountain in the region. The highway cut through the mountain by tunnels. At many places it leads on bridges above sacred sites, which is not a good thing to do in Tibet. The constructions demanded a lot of soil, sand and stone extraction, causing a lot of noise and pollution. The traffic led to traffic jams in places where just a few years earlier was no permanent presence of men, to which nomads came to spend 1 or 2 months during their summers, or for their summer pastures. One half of the pilgrim path was turning into a literally pool of mud or dust, depending on weather. Pilgrims walked and prostrated among all the different constructions and trucks and heavy machinery. This is just a car bringing cement. These are the different pilgrims trying to find a way through. This is the autumn camp of the nomads. So they have to take the animals over the construction site they had at the time. So it was a bit challenging to walk through this. Here the road leads above a temple, which is considered not very polite, auspicious, even dangerous to do in Tibet. But the road will apparently bring pristine mountains and rivers, as the signs say. What does all this mean for the Golok people and others? Amnye Machen will finish. Amnye Machen will finish soon. This is what one of them said. At the beginning, so many trucks came and raised a lot of dust. The strong wind carried it on the glacier, and as a result, the snow melts faster and faster. Nothing can be done about it. In the past, there were no houses here. Then the Chinese came 60 years ago and started building them. Many people and later many cars came. Where there are many people, the place cannot become good. In the past, there were very big and beautiful flowers here, and the kettle was big. Now look how small the flowers are, the kettle is small, and both people and kettle suffer from diseases. Now there are too many people, too many roads, and too many cars. Amnye Machen's treasures are extracted, and his snow is melting. This place cannot become good. There will be no water, no grass, so no good kettle. The people and land will suffer. They are pointing to the opened mines in the area of Amnye Machen in the recent years, which is kept secret, or it's not something that one could find information about easily. But it is happening and people know where the mines are. The substances or metals mined, taken out, are said to be copper and gold, and then other things. Then another respondent shared this quote: "If people extract too much soil, the soil's essence, the statue that we met with the treasure offerings, will disappear. The mountain's glacier is viewed as the abode of the deity. At the present, the glacier is melting quickly and is likely to melt away in the near future. People are sometimes afraid to mention or imagine that it might no longer be there. For some, it remains a forbidden topic. Once I've asked my mother, what will happen if Amnye Machen's snow melts away? It won't melt away, you can't speak like that, she replied." This photo is from a local NGO, and it shows the recess of the glacier during 1 year from this stone marked in yellow to this place. I think it was between 2015 and 16. So we can see that it's quite big. It's several dozens of meters every year. How do educated ecological activists see this? I don't believe the reason is only the world climate change. In my opinion, it is the soil extraction, new constructions, building of houses. There are more causes. It is not a global change. I don't believe that. As people say, once the snow melts away, the deity Amnye Machen is likely to leave, either for India or for his nephew Nyenpo Yutse, quite nearby, the second most important sacred mountain of Golok. Amnye Machen will choose a peak where no roads will lead and no tourists will come. People witness a significant weather change as well. as I was told in 2016, after the Tibetan New Year, it hasn't snowed this year yet. There has been a strong wind and the soil or dust has been falling for 3 days now. We have never experienced such a weather here in our lives. In the past it snowed and rained more, the place is becoming dry. It is because so many Chinese come and the treasures are being extracted. They build these roads to take them away. Look how many big cars, trucks come here. They are taking Amnye Machen's treasures away. There was a heavy snowfall soon after this dialogue, but it shows what many people feel. The interviewee refers to the officially hidden but widely known mines in the area, and the locals have a very difficult feeling about this. These narratives fit very well with the notions of Western science. When a glacier diminishes or disappears, the springs and rivers dry out and the whole ecosystem dries out, which means less grass, less and smaller cattle, vulnerable to diseases, and a deteriorating situation for the people. All this depends on Amnye Machen snow. The snow represents for the Tibetan the prosperity and vitality of the place. Without it, there's no yang and sachu, the two categories necessary. The current situation causes a lot of anger and desperateness among not only local people. Amnye Machen is believed to be able to take revenge. Articles circulate on Tibetan social media representing these problems and showing pictures of the construction site, garbage left, storage places of explosives, water pollution, and the like. An NGO called after Amnye Machen, designed to protect the site, was established by local nomads soon after the highway construction started. But to convey a more balanced view, there are also a number of Tibetans, locals and outsiders who welcome the highway, mostly businessmen. But in my experience, they represent a minority, and during the pilgrimage in 2014 and 15, what I just presented was definitely the prevailing view and feeling among the pilgrims. The proclamation of the National Geopark is aimed at bringing domestic tourists and income for the region, and together with other development projects to transform the whole of Golok Prefecture by economic growth, modernization, urbanization, influx of job seekers, and in fact by incorporating the so far quite isolated Golok more effectively into the state and its policies. These happenings inevitably lead to a reinterpretation, secularization and commodification of the holy site. Amnye Machen is, on the Chinese market, marketed as a commodity of precious environmental resources in a global trade network, being exploited in fact and recreated. The recreation is both physical and interpretative, as we've seen, and the state uses this as an ideological tool to territorialize the place, imprinting its own political order. And I'm borrowing from Emily Ye here. For the local people, these happenings represent an endangerment of local stability, traditional ethical and religious values, lifestyle, own identity, social integrity, but also habitability of the place itself. People take themselves as responsible for the land, and especially if the land is so sacred as Amnye Machen. They view this bond as essential for their existence. One important concept via these views are expressed is the concept of treasures. So treasures behold the yang and sachu, the two categories of vitality and well-being and prosperity. They are especially needed, these treasures, in times of ecological degradation, felt pressure and instability, and also uncertainty of own identity. The current situation makes people to offer more treasures. Despite all these happenings, the cult of Amnye Machen is not diminishing. On the contrary, we've seen that he receives a massive turn-up of pilgrims, massive offerings, and also treasure offerings. Tibetans still see him as a powerful Xibu and Buddha. That's all.
Yeah, we've got like 10 minutes for question.
Maybe I should say that the highway is now finished. I was afraid to go to see it last year, but it was almost finished already 2.5 years ago. From one half of the Kora, the huge highway, and then the other half of the Kora is being covered by also a new road, which is not a highway, but it's a motorway road, and that was finished last year.
I think you called
And
it.
other mountains have a similar development. There's a car circumambulation path being developed at Mount Kailash in Western Tibet, I've heard. And this National Geopark scheme is implemented quite quickly in China, and many sites chosen happen to be sacred sites for Tibetans or other different ethnic groups across China.
I think you taught it at a very critical time, because in